Gemara. Let's see in the art scroll. Go back to that line in the Gemara that we missed. We're on 53b2. Let's go back to the first column, 53b2. Ulebehema migadrina. Right, that point of the Gemara, first column. Right. Well, what did the Gemara say? The Gemara said that the rabbi said that you could put a saddlecloth on the animal to keep the animal warm. The animal it's cold even in the summertime, and you're allowed to busy yourself to prevent the pain for the animal on the Shabbat. You can get busy. You can get busy. Even though on Shabbat you got to be careful not to get busy and sidetracked and busy in other things. But you're allowed to go ahead and do that to alleviate the pain of the animal. So then the Gemara questioned that, and the Gemara said, L'behema, and then let's see what and then the Gemara questioned that. We have a story about an animal who has a lot of extra blood in its body, and we said you can't go ahead and get busy, with the animal, hanging out with the animal by the water, that the animal should cool off. And the Gemara had a question, why not? If the animal is in distress, why shouldn't you, it's uncomfortable because there's extra blood in its body, why shouldn't you be able to be busy by standing the animal up, standing with the animal, making sure the animal goes into the water, which would help the animal in that situation? Why shouldn't, if you're concerned, if you're allowed to go ahead and put the saddlecloth on the animal to warm up the animal, to help alleviate its pain, so why can't you go ahead and go by the water to help alleviate its pain? That was the Gemara's question. And the Gemara says that there's a different issue, because when it comes to put a saddlecloth on the animal when it's hot, when it's cold, there's no concern if you do that, you might come to do a sin. It's only the question, is that called excessive effort on Shabbat? Effort that's not necessary. So we say that that's not a problem. However, Because you're alleviating the pain of the animal. However, if it would be just for pleasure for the animal, you wouldn't be able to get busy for the animal just to make the animal more pleasurable. Good morning, Ralph.
Morning, Rabbi.
But then the Gemara says, so why shouldn't you be able to stand, help be by the animal, but when they, walk the animal into the water to cool off when it has the blood issue? So what did the Gemara say? That's the issue of healing. And if you're going to allow to take the animal to the water, lead the animal to the water when it has the blood issue, maybe you're going to come, meaning it's healing the animal. So healing the animal, now you enter into a different area, because we're afraid you might come to grind herbs. We spoke about that, Moshe. Let's grind the herbs, right, Ralph? The concern of grinding on Shabbat, which therefore the rabbi said that's a different issue, and we're not going to allow. That's Ula's approach. Ula said the reason why you can't go ahead and go, and lead the animal to the water on Shabbat when it has the blood issue in its body is because that might come to, because we're concerned you might come to violate the Torah by grinding herbs for healing purposes. If you could do that act of healing, you might come to grind. So the Gemara said, then the Gemara now is questioning, Ulbehema migazrinan. Ralph, we are on
E3.
53b, the first column on 53b on the first column on the bottom. Ulbehema migazrinan. Are you afraid in such a circumstance by a behema, by an animal, that we're going to make a concern of when there's a great loss possible to the animal, to the owner? The animal might die if it has this blood issue, and you're saying even if the animal has excess blood in its body, we're not going to allow you to do this act that might come to prevent the loss. We're not going to allow you to lead the animal to the water because we're afraid of a problem. We're afraid maybe you're going to come grind, we're afraid of for the medical purposes. We're afraid you might come to grind. But we find Vatanya, we learned to the bright, the Haita Medet Chutz L'Tchum, if the animal was standing outside the boundary, and we explained on Shabbat, you can't walk, there's certain limitations even where you can walk on Shabbat. Not only you can't carry from private to public, you can't walk outside a city. If you reach the certain, whatever it's called, as long as you have houses all along, it's not called, you're still in the city, right, Adam? Once you leave, let's say you go certain places, there's no houses, and therefore, after a certain point, it's called you went outside the city, and then you're only limited in how far you could go. Let's say you go 2,000 amot, which is maybe between 3,000 and 4,000 feet outside the city. So if the animal was outside the city limits, it says Korelavi Ba. We say you can actually call to the animal, and the animal could come to you, right? You have your limits. You could walk up to a certain spot, right? Good morning, Mark.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good to see you on a Monday. Today's Monday, today's Tuesday.
Yeah, today's Monday.
Usually we know the days by when Mark comes, you know what I'm saying? That's how we mark the days. We mark the days.
I'm here because I have a mazel tov. My daughter had a baby girl yesterday.
Mabruk.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay,
So I came to New York for the birth.
great. We have to thank your daughter. Okay. So maybe we want to make sure when Mark comes, you have a seat, you want to prepare a seat to him.
Don't worry about that. It's okay.
Okay, Mark, just to bring you up to date, we are discussing the issue of, let's just see how to bring up to date. We just started talking about, we're talking about refuah on Shabbat, right? We said there is a issue, the rabbis made an injunction that you can't go ahead and do certain things on Shabbat for healing purposes, because you might come to grind herbs. You might come to grind herbs on Shabbat. And grinding is one of the malachot on Shabbat, right? We said, generally speaking, when it comes to medication, if a person has an infection, the rabbis did not forbade you to take medication when you have an infection. They did not create of course you can't grind on Shabbat, the medicine on Shabbat, unless it's a danger of life and there's no other way, right? But it's a desecration of Shabbat to grind the herbs on Shabbat. But the rabbis said you can't take medicine that's already been grounded, that's already been prepared before Shabbat, lest you come to, because the concern you might come to actually grind on Shabbat. But the rabbis did not put that rabbinic prohibition in a case where a person has an infection, or if the person is bedridden, if the type of ailment they have is they're bedridden, or it's felt throughout the whole body. If a person has a little bit of something that's bothering them a little bit, that's where the type of thing that you would not, something it's not an infection, you're not bedridden, it's not affecting your whole body. Let's say that's the type of thing that you should not be taking medicine on Shabbat. Now, the Gemara said that by an animal, we said there's certain types of activities that we're going to allow you to do on Shabbat that's not called. You see, let's say if the animal is cold, right? Good morning, Asaf. If the animal is cold. Now, cold has nothing to do with healing an animal, but then we got into a different issue called excess effort on Shabbat that's not necessary. Being involved on Shabbat with types of activity which is time-consuming, which is some burdensome in a certain sense, a type of activities, we say on Shabbat that you should not be busy on Shabbat with things that are not necessary for you to be busy with. And the Gemara said that getting busy and putting on a saddlecloth around an animal on Shabbat, when the animal is cold, the Gemara says that is allowed on Shabbat. You could go ahead, and that's not called an effort that's you're busying yourself by putting the saddlecloth on the animal and on Shabbat, because that's much more necessary, because it's a necessary thing that the animal shouldn't be it's a type of thing that warrants the allowance you to get busy with putting the cloth on the animal, because it's the animal's in a discomfort because of the coldness. But if the animal had a wound and the wound was healed, and now you just want to do something for the animal that will just make the animal more comfortable, make the animal feel good, not that it's in distress, but just something that the Gemara said you can't do, right? The Gemara differentiates between an act being busy for the animal to remove a discomfort of the animal, in contrast to create a pleasure for the animal, right? That's it. When it's not discomfort, just a pleasure, that the Gemara says you shouldn't do. And the Gemara therefore said that, explains the story is if an animal has at least one opinion, the Gemara brought a Braita, that if an animal has excessive blood running in its body, and it seems that the way to heal that is that the animal should go to a pool of water, a body of water, and cool off in the body of water, and that will heal the situation with the blood. And we said you can't do that act of going with the animal, bringing the animal to the water, walking the animal to the water on Shabbat, because it's clear that act is an act of refuah. It's clear that act is an act of healing. And since it's an act of healing, you can't do that act of healing on Shabbat, because if you're going to do that act of healing on Shabbat, then you're going to come to, we're concerned that you might come to do a different act of healing on Shabbat, which is you might come to grind medication in order to heal the animal if the animal have a certain ailment.
Question.
Yeah.
So there's two questions I have. Number one is a personal question that's not really related. Am I allowed to grind with my fingers? There's like flaky salt. Could I rub it together to put it into my salad? Or am I not allowed to do that? Is that grinding? Not grinding with a tool, with a marble bowl.
Right. So the question was that already? We have to look at, was that already grounded once? Now you're just grounding and regrinding it, or not? That's because we have to see if there is something. Is it called grinding after grinding? See, we could take out the Shulchan Aruch. Was that already ground? Was that salt already grounded? Or that was a piece that was never grounded?
I'm sure it wasn't. Salt is a solid block, so it's not. I'm sure it was some level. It had to be. Some level has to be.
Okay, so we'd have to take out the Shulchan Aruch about if something that was grounded, whether there is a problem of grounding after grounding. That would be.
Is my fingers action grinding? I thought grinding is when you have what do they
tool.
call that?
That'd be a tool.
Yeah. So is my two fingers rubbing something together, grinding?
And that's a good question. We could take out the Shulchan Aruch to see that. That's question one. What's question two?
Question two is more about healing with somewhat like if someone gets injured and they're bleeding.
Yeah.
What's the halakha there?
Right. First of all, first of all, anytime there's danger, again, you're not grinding. The act that you're doing to violate the Shabbat, a person has to be in danger. To violate the Torah law, you have to be in danger of life. But if a person is not in danger of life, he's bleeding, not in danger of life. So we're not talking about doing an act of a biblical prohibition of grinding. We're talking about putting a bandage on it to stopping and stopping the wound anyways, you're preventing it from getting worse. But it's not, that type of act is allowed. They're not then that type of act that if a person is what are you doing? Question is, what are you doing for the person? You're just stopping the bleeding. You're not, that type of thing is not that the rabbis will not forbade you to do that act on Shabbat.
Wow.
Now let me get the Shulchan Aruch for a second. As you know, there's 39 malachot on Shabbat, right? There's 39 chief categories of malach on Shabbat, and one of those categories is tochen, is grinding. So in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Shin Chaf Aleph, 321, he talks about, he lists the techina, din tochen b'Shabbat. Um, so he says you can't take crushed salt in a moduch shel eitz, like a certain type of wooden type of grinder that they use to cut to do the salt. Um, but he says you could use. He says you could use the the handle of the knife. He says, and the Mishnah Berurah says that you could use your fingers. So far, Mark, from initial research, using your hands doesn't seem to be the normal way of grinding that they forbade, that they would say that the type of grinding that would be permitted. But
Yeah.
this is discussed more, as we're gonna, we have to look more into the halacha. But so far, initial look is looking pretty. Is looking pretty good,
Okay.
but we have to look a little more into it.
All right.
Okay, getting back to our Gemara. So the Gemara has established that we are concerned for you. We're concerned. We're going to, even though we allow you to do certain things that remove the discomfort of the animal, but if it's a healing situation, then we're afraid we're not going to allow you to do that, because you might come um, to grind. That's what the Gemara said yesterday. And today we're going to go to the Behema Migazrina, right? So again, we're going back to the 53b, 53b2, right? That's all up to Adam. 53b2 on the bottom. Behema Migazrina. Are we going to make a gzeira? Are the rabbis going to make a rabbinic prohibition in a case where there's going to be a big loss? Are they going to make a rabbinic prohibition when there'll be a loss in this situation? What's the loss going to be? The Gemara is saying, because the loss could be that the animal, if you don't bring the animal to the water, when the animal has this blood issue, excessive blood in its body, the animal might die. And now you're telling me that the rabbis are going to make a decree, even in this case, and it must probably what the Gemara is concerned with is that if you make this gzeira, let's okay, so let's see how they but behema migosrina. Do we make the gzeira even, meaning are we afraid, do we make this gzeira? Good morning, Mark. do we make this enactment even when there's a big loss? If even if there's a concern of big loss? And the Gemara says, "Vatanya." We learned in the Braita. Haita behema omedes chutz l'tchum. The animal was. You have it, Mark? 53b2 on the bottom column, first column on the bottom on the bottom. Got it? Behema migazvina. First column, 53b2. Behema migazvina. So the Gemara says, "Vatanya." We have a case. Haita behemedet chutz l'tchum. If the animal was outside the area where you're allowed to walk on Shabbat, right? You could walk up to 2,000 amos, up to 3,000 to 4,000 feet outside the city, and your animal was outside of that area. Kori love hiba. You could call to the animal, and it could come to you. Now, the fact that I can't go outside my boundary on Shabbat. And if my items, things that belong to me, went outside the boundary on Shabbat, so they're bound by they have also my boundary. Wherever I could go, those items have the same boundaries as me. And if they but nevertheless, I could go ahead and call the animal. I can't take an item that when something went outside my boundary, I can't go pick up the item and bring it to me. Same way it's outside. If I can't go outside my my boundary, right? So I can't something that's out. If the animal's outside my boundary, I can't take it from outside my boundary. I can, but if I call the animal, right? If I'm standing, let's say the place where you are before Shabbat, where you're eating, where your food is. So what they do is they have something called Eruv Techumim. If you want to extend your boundary, so let's say before Shabbat, if you put a certain amount of food, let's say 1,900 and something amot, let's say less than outside of let's say I have 2,000 amot to go. So let's say I could go 2,000 amot to this side, right? I go 2,000 to the east, 2,000 to the west, 2,000 to the north. I'm right here. I have 2,000 amot. So if I want to put my food before Shabbat 1,900 amot away from me on this side, then I could go extend it. I could go 2,000 amot from that food. Right? That's called Eruv Techumim. That's when you put the food before Shabbat in that spot, and the food is there before Shabbat. That makes it your spot, right? So here I have my spot. This is my area, and I could go 2,000 amot. So, but what happened was my animal was 2,001 amot. Let's say, it's now outside it's outside where I can't go. I can't walk there. I can't go there, but it's outside and I can't go ahead and. I can't bring it in. So, but I could call the animal. The animal has no problem of the animal itself going, traveling outside meaning, let's see, they say like this over here. The animal going, and you don't have to prevent the animal from going outside your boundary. The same way you don't have to prevent your animal from eating grass, right? I can't have my animal do that type of work that we say that I can't have my animal do. But I can't go ahead and take my animal and I can't push the animal, throw my animal outside or push the animal outside my boundary. That I can't do. I can't take my hand and bring it in from outside my boundary, or do it with my hand itself. That I can't do, or but to call the animal, we said to call the animal, I'm allowed to go ahead and call the animal to come from outside the boundary and bring him inside the boundary. So that's what it says. If the animal was outside the boundary, Kori la v'hiba. I could call the animal, and the animal could come to me. Right? I could call the animal, and the animal could come to me. Now, the Gemara says, now, v'lo gazrinan dilma atele tuye. Now, why aren't we afraid that you might come to bring the animal with your hands from outside the tchum? Maybe you're going to come take the animal. If you allow me to go ahead and call the animal, right? Why don't we make a gzeirah? And the same way we say that we have a problem that you might come to grind. If you're going to allow me to go ahead and bring the animal to the water when the animal has a lot of blood in its body, right? Aaron, we said we're afraid because we're making a gzeirah. You might come to grind. If you allow you to do that, you might come to grind. So why aren't we concerned when we allow you to go ahead and call the animal? Why don't we make a gzeirah that maybe you're going to actually take the animal directly? We don't make a gzeirah the same way we make a gzeirah that you might come to grind. We should make the gzeirah maybe you're going to come to carry the animal. Go out of your boundaries and to carry the animal from outside your boundary, right? I mean, some, you know. So why don't we make that there? Like you said, I'll go outside my boundary. I'm right by the boundary. I call the animal, so I might come to actually go outside the boundary to do whatever to do whatever I'm doing. So we're not afraid. And if you're not afraid over there, because most probably you say that if because there'll be if you're not going to allow him to call the animal and come, there'll be a loss, right? The animal, you might get lost in the woods or wherever the animal might go. So financial loss, we allow you. We don't make the zera. We didn't forbade you from calling the animal. So why should we make the zera that you might come to grind the earth? What we shouldn't make the gzeira that maybe if you're gonna walk your animal to the water, you might come to grind the spices, the herbs. So the Gemara says, Amar Ravina. Ravina says the reason why over there we didn't impose a gzeira. Ravina says you're right. The same way we're concerned, good morning, Boker Tov. The same way we're concerned that if you're going to go ahead and if you're going to bring your animal to the water and the animal will get healed, we're afraid you're going to go ahead and maybe you might come to actually grind herbs and spice and to make a medication. So we should really be afraid that maybe if you're going to allow you to call the animal to come to you within your boundary, you might actually walk out and leave the boundary on Shabbat. But we're talking about a case that somehow the Gemara is going to say that the animal was within your tchum, within your boundary, but not within its boundary. What does that mean? That means if you're the owner of the animal, your animal is bound by where you are. That's what the animal has the same, rights. How far? Meaning its boundary. Again, we said the animal has the right to go outside. No one, but its boundary is but you can't just actually, its boundary is your boundary. That means if you gave it over to a shepherd, the shepherd now gave over to someone who's responsible for the animal. The animal now has the shepherd's boundary. So here we're talking about the animal now has the shepherd's boundary. It's within your boundary. So really, there is no problem for you to go ahead and actually walk to the animal. So that concern is not here. So because it's within your, but it's outside its boundary because the boundary of the animal is now bound by the boundary of the what? Of the shepherd.
So let's say his boundary is less than yours. That's really what you're saying.
Right,
His boundary's closer to
the owner of the animal is right, and there.
Oh,
Okay, we're talking about the owner of the animal and this animal are within, they're within each other's boundary. Sorry, the animal is not in the animal is outside the shepherd.
the-
No, what did we say? We said the owner gave the animal over to a shepherd.
Right, and is his boundary short of the owner, or is it beyond the owner?
Oh, so we're saying that the animal is now within the owner's
So
boundary.
there's no
But,
question. It's in my
but it's
boundary, I can
outside,
do whatever I want.
but it's outside, the shepherd's boundary. And the animal is bound by the shepherd's boundary.
Who cares?
So now when it goes into the owner's boundary, it will be going outside, it will be going,
Shepherds.
you know,
Not outside his own.
no, but it'll be
Because it's within, it's short of the owner's boundary.
but it's going within the owner's boundary, but it's still
Let's
going,
say the owner's boundary's here.
right,
The shepherd's boundary's here. So now the animal goes here, it's still in my boundary, but it's outside the shepherd's boundary.
right.
There's no hiddush, I could take anyone's animal over here.
Yeah, but you can't actually take it directly with your hands. See, you could on Shabbat, meaning there's the concern. What do you say? You could call the animal.
Why is it even a question of taking the animal by a leash? What's the problem?
Let's say by the leash on the Shabbat. An animal that's outside its tchum, its
Right.
boundary.
Yeah.
I can't go ahead and bring it into my boundary. Even if it's within my boundary, I can't directly pull it. So that I can't do.
So
Even though it's
I can't
But
do it on public domain.
even though it's in my boundary, correct? But
Can I put it in a public domain?
so let's say I can walk
put it in
down
Public domain, why can't I do it anywhere?
because here it's outside the animal's boundary, meaning the
Is it a public domain outside the animal's boundary?
public domain is within city limits. Maybe yes, it could be within city limits. But here we're saying that the animal is outside its boundary,
Okay,
and therefore you can't bring it you can't if it's outside its boundary, you can't directly take an animal that's outside its boundary and move it 4 amot, let's say. Move it if it's outside its boundary. It went out. You can't directly do it, but you could actually cause it. That's no problem. So here we're saying we could go ahead and since it's within your boundary, we allow you to go ahead and call it, and we say that's fine.
I could call it if it's outside of my boundary. No? Right.
Yeah, but the question is, are we afraid? Yeah, but again, but
If it's outside my boundary, I could call it, not take it by hand.
right.
Do you agree? Outside my boundary.
No, the Gemara is now saying the Gemara is now making a distinction between an animal that's my animal that is bound by my boundary, and an animal that's bound by the shepherd's boundary.
Well, let's go before that.
Yes.
If it's bound by my boundary, it's outside my boundary, am I allowed to call it without?
So the Gemara is saying now I would not be allowed to do that. That's what he's suggesting. He's making a distinction between if the animal's outside of my boundary or the animal's outside the shepherd's boundary. And that's what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying that if the animal's outside the shepherd's boundary, the Gemara is saying, but it's within my boundary. So therefore that I could call it because we don't have the concern of me maybe going outside of my boundary because the animal's within my boundary.
Can I pull it by hand then?
You should, but you can't, but you still can't pull it directly. Therefore, you have to call it.
Why? But there's no concern if you're going outside the
Right,
boundary.
right, but again, it's still outside the animal's boundary. Remember,
Right.
so therefore, because it's outside the animal's boundary, I have to respect that fact that I can't directly move the animal from outside its boundary to move it for animal, to move something that's outside its boundary. It's in a place that it's not supposed to be. Meaning, or not supposed to be, or it's a place that I can't directly moves an animal that's outside its boundary,
Back into.
it has to be inside its boundary, right?
Right.
Right. So therefore, this seems to what the Gemara is saying, that here there's less. Once we removed the issue that it's within the owner's boundary, so therefore, therefore maybe that's why we did not make a gezerah and we did not forbade you from calling the animal. But even though you can't directly pull the animal, but once you already remove that concern of the owner going out of his boundary, because the animal's within the owner's boundary, therefore we allow you to call to it. But when it comes to the case of the medication, if you're going to allow the animal, if you're going to go allow the animal, if you're going to bring the animal to the water, so then the Gemara says, then we're afraid you're going to come to actually do the prohibition of grinding the medication, and therefore that's why the prohibition is over there. So that's what the Gemara had. That's one approach, and then on Friday we said the other approach of Nachum Bar Yitzchak. Okay, I want to wish everyone a beautiful day.
Oh, wow.
Thank you all for
Excellent.
the hard Gemara, not easy Gemara, everybody. But we got to keep the cheshbon. Ralph is working hard, right, Ralph?
I lost track of the time.
Okay, have a great day, everybody. There's a lot going on.
Okay.